You are watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene here alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, as always, great to be alongside you.
It's great to be back alongside with you, Eugene. You just caught my electricity going out and coming back on. Like, it was like it knew.
It's
perfect
interesting.
Timing.
Especially because we ended the show last week with your electricity going out, and so we're starting the show today. You had kind of a Blair Witch Project thing going on last week. Very popular movie.
Well, I was trying to recreate it, but also it happened yesterday when I did a live stream with Muin Rabbani for Dispatches. And as soon as I said his name, like I was introducing him, my electricity went out.
Hey.
And I was like, oh, my electricity is greeting you. It's greeting the listeners and viewers. So, I mean, from Lebanon to you and wherever you are, the electricity says hello. Wow, could I get any cornier?
Yeah, probably. But I don't even want to reveal some of your other, corny hobbies and pastimes.
I'm not ashamed.
Well, I am on your behalf and your family and friends. So we'll keep those. Wow. We'll keep those into the special $10,000 donation Patreon only seminar that we'll do of Rania's corny habits.
$10,000, I will give you my corniest, most shameful, ridiculous jokes.
Nice.
Revealed.
Nice. That's worth it.
Rania Khalek's jokes revealed.
Indeed.
Indeed. Patreon.com/breakthroughnews.
Some of you here are watching this on YouTube. And just to remind you, yes, this is the Freedom Side, despite what you're hearing here. But nonetheless, if you're here on YouTube, make sure you hit subscribe, then hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things that you subscribe to. And also shout out to everybody who is watching on Free Speech TV. You don't need to do anything but keep watching and keep pushing, and shout out to the whole FSTV team for making it possible for us to appear to you through that medium. Rania, are there other things you would like our viewers to know before we get started here?
In fact, there are, Eugene. You can help support Breakthrough News. You can literally be a part of the support team by becoming a member of Breakthrough News. You go to patreon.com/Breakthrough News for as little as $5 a month, though you're more than welcome to give more than that. You can become a member of Breakthrough News and get access to exclusive content as well as exclusive merch, such as the very cool mug that we drink out of during the show. And on top of that, I mean, more importantly than the exclusive content and the exclusive merch, you get to help support independent media at a time when the corporate media apparatus is shoving a tsunami of disinformation, misinformation down our faces constantly, supporting and justifying genocide in Gaza, supporting and justifying constant warfare and aggression against the entire planet, essentially. So here at Breakthrough News, we're an independent outlet. We exist and we are sustainable because of what you are able to provide for us. So help become a part of that so we can continue to grow by becoming a member at patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And also for those who are watching on YouTube, you can give donations in the live stream. And if you want to give a one-time donation, we accept those too. You can go to breakthroughnews.org and do that there. But highly encourage you, if you're able, it's more important than ever that we support independent media outlets like Breakthrough News to help give people, reality and tell the truth about what's happening.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. We want to try to break through, quote unquote, all of the just unbelievable lies, disinformation, misinformation, and decontextualization that is out there for you. So everyone who is supporting, thank you so much for all your support. And everyone who's going to become a supporter, we really appreciate your future support in all endeavors, not just donating, but helping people know that we are here. And of course, I don't know, Rania, you were going to say something.
I was actually. God, you're so good at that. I was going to add that I believe we had this, we wanted to meet 5,000 patrons, right? That was our goal, to get to 5,000.
Was that our goal? Are we there?
Yeah. We gotta do our goals, but we're not there. We are at 4,145 members on Patreon right now. So if we can get to 5,000, I feel like there's something special we should do when we get to 5,000. Maybe I'm just creating this goal now. But I think we can get to 5,000. We have over 800,000 subscribers on YouTube. Surely surely 900 of you can help us meet that 5,000 benchmark by becoming patrons at patreon.com/breakthroughnews.
I agree. Well said. Well, let's get right into it. And as you know, we like to bring you all sorts of things here. We also always like to bring you interesting new books, especially ones that intersect very heavily with all of the various currents swirling around the world today that we're constantly talking about here on the show. And we are very, very happy to be able to talk today about a great new text, African Uhuru, The Fight for African Freedom and the Rise of the Global South. This is the cover, and we have with us, honored to have with us, I must say, Roger McKenzie, who's the international editor of the Morning Star newspaper as well, a longtime anti-racist organizer and an executive member of the executive of the Communist Party of Britain. He's also just recently returned from China, where he's been doing some great report backs in the Morning Star. Roger, thanks so much for having us, and thanks so much for putting this text out.
No, thanks for having me.
Well, great to have you here. There's so much that can be said, so we might go all around the world. I mean, I had wanted to do a segment on the book, and then I saw that you had gone to Xinjiang, and I had to say it felt so apropos, because in the book itself, you talk about many things, but one of the big pieces is the role of African diasporic populations in radical movements, building internationalism across the globe and helping to build people-to-people links and expose the machinations of the press that would like to get in the way of that. So, I guess my first question in a way is how do you see this text in this book that you've written in the context? Because you have here as the subhead, The Fight for African Freedom and the Rise of the Global South. How do you see the role of Africa, and how are you bringing this out in this text in terms of what everyone's talking about, the rise of multipolarity, the changes happening in the world? I'll just leave it there for you.
Well, I think that it's right, the way that people talk about the rise of Eurasia. I think that's absolutely right. But I think what's often left out of the conversation is the role of Africa, and the way that I think that we need to look at Africa, which for me is not just looking at Africa in the sense of the continent, as important as that is, and the challenges that there are on the continent, but I think also in terms of the diaspora. And I think that's really important, because when we look at the African diaspora, what we're actually looking at is a whole bunch of people, millions of people across the globe, who are also going to contribute towards what I think is a really important moment in time. And this moment in time, and this is really what I'm trying to get at in the book, this moment in time is a really pivotal moment where it can go one of a number of different ways, where we can actually get to this genuine kind of multilateral world, where people treat each other with a bit of respect and don't try and stamp over people's sovereignty and so on. Or we're going to get a position where we continue with the sort of nonsense neoliberal kind of stuff that we currently have, where the United States wants to rule everybody, and if you're not part of them, then you're not part of anything as far as they're concerned, and they'll do you in the bat of an eyelid. So for me, what I'm talking about in this book is the need for people to recognize the importance of Africa and the diaspora, but also some of the challenges that we've faced over the years, not least of which is the challenge that we face from people who've frankly said that they were on our side, and weren't on our side. So some of those people being people within the trade union and labour movement who, certainly in Britain, which is what I predominantly write about in the book, that we've had to set up our own communities of resistance to stand up, to be able to fight against racism. And I think it's that fight against racism that has always existed since there was racism. We've always stood up against it. It's that fight against racism that I think is going to determine where we go next.
I mean, I think it's all super on point what you're saying. And when you talk about the rise of the global South, I mean, just I guess to segue to the fact that you were just in China, a lot of that is connected to the rise of China as well, which does give space to a lot of global South countries to pursue paths maybe a little bit more independent than the sort of bullied interests of the US than they were able to before. And that includes many African countries. So I'm curious, what took you to China? And how do you connect the rise of China to the themes that you're discussing about your book?
Well, I mean, the kind of flippant answer is an aeroplane took me to China, but what took me to China was was a genuine interest in trying to get underneath the kind of lies that are told about China. Because as a person of African descent, we've had to put up with those kind of lies. And looking at the kind of lies that are told about the Palestinians all the time. Well, we've had to put up with those sort of lies. But what I see on a massive scale, I mean, it's an industrial lying going on about China, and particularly about Xinjiang, and about the alleged genocide that's taking place, which is just garbage. I mean, it's not. I'll tell you what, for a country that is supposedly spending all of its time doing down its minorities, I tell you what, China spends an awful lot of time celebrating its minorities. That's what I saw when I was there. And it's not like the sort of half-baked kind of celebrations of diversity that we certainly have in Britain, and I'm sure you have elsewhere in the world. What we see is what I think was a really genuine attempt to celebrate the diversity that is that part of China, but I think is other parts of China as well. And I drew real parallels with what I saw in China, with what I experienced growing up, where people would tell me that, you're not worth it, you're not good enough for anything, that you should get out of our country, and they tell lies about why we're in Britain and what we're trying to do. We're stealing everyone's jobs apparently, and I forgot we're also for the men amongst us, we're also, even as like 5-year-olds, stealing women apparently as well. But all of those lies are told about us. So as somebody who writes about the international affairs every day, what I wanted to do was to have that opportunity to go to China and to look at what is actually going on over there. Let's get beneath some of the stuff that's being said. And what I saw, and nobody stopped me from going anywhere. Nobody stopped me from talking to anybody that I wanted to talk about. In fact, one of the jokes while we were out there is that people were tripping over themselves to have like selfies with me because they obviously like my locks or whatever. And I don't know how many black people that they see out there, but people wanted to talk and wanted to chat and talk about what was going on there. And we're very proud of their region. And that's what really, really struck me, was that they were really proud of their region, autonomous region of Xinjiang in China. They were proud of it. Now, you're not going to be proud of somewhere that's doing you down. You'll find every way possible of telling me somehow, even in code somehow, about what's actually taking place there. Nobody had any problems at all in telling me just how really proud they were of their region, but also how they were proud of the diversity that existed within that region. And for me, that was really telling because, we have all sorts of things said, certainly in Britain, I'm sure elsewhere, about diversity, the importance of it. And we know that people don't actually mean it. It's like when people were tripping over themselves to take a knee during the Black Lives Matter stuff, we knew that they didn't really mean it, that they were doing it because they could get a photo op and so on. But what I saw over there, I felt was something really genuine and something really important. And I think we should be telling that story. And frankly, the corporate media should be ashamed of themselves, because I reckon some of these journalists who are writing about Xinjiang have never even been there and have got no intention of going there. They'll just take the press release from the State Department or the Foreign Office in Britain and just write that up.
Yeah, no, I think that's very much the case. And I think some of these people, they say even going there in and of itself, like, is bad because it sort of poisons your view or whatever, the sort of bias, because it must be controlled. So, no, I think that's an important piece you're putting out there and an important eyewitness testimony. And, it just reminds me of something. I mean, you bring to the forefront a number of historical figures across the book who have either are Black Britons from the British colonized Caribbean or spent some time there. And it's just sort of an interesting parallel. The George Padmores, the Claude McKays, CLR James, all these other people, sort of, the Black Britain community, even if people who are not specifically, but the diasporic community centered in Britain, playing such an interesting role over time that it seems like, to me, if I can say this, you're continuing today, playing such an important role as a node of internationalism, not just across the diaspora, of course, but really, across the sort of broader progressive community.
I think one of the most important things for me about internationalism is that it's more than a word. And what I've learned while sitting and writing this book and reading about some of these giants, of communism, of socialism, but people who wanted to make a real difference. One of the things I've learned the most is that you actually have to put theory into practice. You actually have to do something about the so-called solidarity that you have and the international that you have. And I think when you look at the likes of George Padmore, for me, who played an incredible role, there's so many people in the Black community in Britain who've never heard of him. And I think that's a crying shame when you look at the way that he was able to organize so many things internationally without the aid of the internet, without mobile phones, whatever, but he actually went out and talked with people. One of my great heroes is Paul Robeson. I think when we met, Eugene, I was telling you about my great admiration for Paul Robeson. I don't know how many languages he spoke. But it was like loads. And the reason he spoke loads of different languages, because he wanted to talk with people directly. And I think that's what we need to get back to. And that's maybe one of the main kind of issues that I raise in the book, is that, internationalism means person to person contact. And actually, when we just look back to not so very long ago to the anti-apartheid movement, it was one of the things that was always said there, that the way that we were going to get through and defeat the racist apartheid regime was by people-to-people contacts. And I genuinely believe that that's something that we need to get back to, and we just need to learn the lessons of the likes of Robeson and Padmore and CLR James, Claude McKay, all of these great people. Angela Davis understands this perfectly well, and the person who probably one of the people responsible, or if you like, to blame, in terms of, from what a lot of people say, to blame for me being a communist is probably Angela Davis, as you can see behind me, the poster. She played an enormous role, but what she did was an internationalism. And I think the day that we get stuck as a kind of tunnel vision about where we are without thinking about that international perspective, I think that's where we really fall down. That's why I think your program is so important, because you cover so much across the globe that so many other people just don't see. So please just carry on doing what you're doing.
Well, Roger, we want you to carry on what you're doing as well. Sorry, go ahead, Rania.
Yeah. No, I was saying, well, we say the same to you. Please carry on what you're doing.
Yeah. And I also just want to note on the Paul Robeson point, you did have a great article in the Morning Star about Freedom newspaper, all of whose issues are available online, so people can really dive in and check that out. So they should check out all of your pieces. They have to check out your book here, African Uhuru. Great book, interesting read, but an easy read and accessible read that anyone can pick up and learn a lot from. So we really appreciate you, Roger, joining us here. We're going to have you back to talk more about all your travels around the world, all the great work you're doing, but appreciate you giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
No, I'd love to come back. Thanks you so much. Great honor. And keep doing the work that you're doing. Mm-hmm. And by the way, free Palestine.
Right
Always
on.
free
Right on. Love
Palestine.
Roger. Fantastic. African Uhuru, the fight for African freedom and the rise of the global South. Sorry, I was looking at the title, so I was holding up there. Really worth checking out from Manifesto Press there in the UK. And then you can always read Roger in the Morning Star. He's the international editor there as well. So big thanks to him. Yeah, I'm sorry, Rania. I was just giving a plug there, but if you wanted to add anything.
No, I appreciate the connection he made with like, look, we see that we're seeing the lies about Palestine in real time unraveling. And it's a really important moment to explain to people or to tell people, hey, look, all these other parts of the world, you're also being lied to about them as well. Whether it's this or that African country, or whether it's China, or whether it's Venezuela, or whether it's Iran, or North Korea, or Russia, all these countries that are supposed to be like the next Nazi Germany, you know, the way that the US covers them. And it's like the same outlets lying to you about Palestine are lying to you about all those other places. So I think that connection is super important to make.
No, I think so for sure. It's all tied together. I mean, it's one imperial system, and, you know, this sort of I said this last week when we were talking about NATO, you know, the fears of the imperialists of the sort of Afro-Asian century. I mean, we hear so much about the Asian century alone, but Africa is also rising. I mean, obviously there's many challenges. They're in different development spaces. You know, a lot of what you see happening in Asia, you know, is a little bit more advanced. China's this big economy, Vietnam, all these other countries. But nonetheless, this African process of decolonization that is continuing here, and that will lead us into our next story, but across Francophone Africa, of course, and now expanding into Anglophone Africa, and even the fact that I'm using Francophone and Anglophone speaks to the colonial reality of it. But nonetheless, you can see Africans really, you know, reclaiming themselves, and I think reclaiming their wealth, reclaiming their future, their visions, and I think it's an interesting and a very interesting time. So I appreciate Roger's book for tying that in and bringing that in and bringing in some great history. But we want to turn now to the Sahel, where quite a bit has been happening. If you have missed it, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have tightened up their alliance, the Alliance of Sahel States, and really formalized it in a major way. And that, well, there's a lot to be said about that. So why don't we just get into it here? We're very honored to be joined once again by Kambale Musavuli, who's an analyst with the Center for Research on the Congo-Kinshasa. Kambale, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you always.
Well, it's great to have you, and maybe let's just start with the recent summit that took place. I believe it was in Niger, of the Alliance of Sahel States, where they tightened up their alliance. I mean, give us a sense of what really happened there, and some of at least the initial things you're maybe drawing from the expansion, not expansion, but the cohesion of this Alliance of Sahel States.
I mean, it's a very historic moment to be on the African continent and witness what is unfolding from east to west, where people, no matter the language that they're speaking, they are clearly knowing who the enemy is. And Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, they are giving us the compass of what needs to be done. These three countries were part of ECOWAS. They were part of many African institutions. And they did not see changes, fundamental changes in the country, especially around security issues. After what people have described as military coups, I said actually the aspiration of the people of the Sahel to change the elite, the bourgeois class that control the country. We saw military leaders take control of the country, and they continue to listen to the voice of the people if you follow very closely. Now, the creation of the Confederation, the Alliance des États du Sahel, and their first summit that took place earlier in July, I think it was July 6th that took place, is simply I could say, the aspiration of people. And what is it actually? People of Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali have seen for decades instability in the country. As soon as this country created an alliance, they actually seen progress. They see that the so-called jihadists are not able to do the attacks that they have done. They've seen cities controlled by terrorists now in control of the government. So they're seeing concrete progress. The second thing is the control of their wealth, particularly uranium, where they saw that they determined the cost of the uranium that was sold in the country by France, and that the uranium leaving the country benefited French people and Europe in general, while inside of Niger, for example, people still didn't have access to electricity. Now that they have built the alliance, they are actually working to strengthen the regional cooperation, to use the resources to benefit the people, and to have the security alliance that's going to still protect the people. But the biggest story is not necessarily just the summit. It's what happened after the summit, right? On July 6th, there was a summit that created a confederation of the Sahel Alliance of these three countries. But the next day, it was a meeting of ECOWAS, right? Countries met. And when you look at the statement coming out of ECOWAS, it's actually worrisome. The president of Senegal, the new president of Senegal, Diomaye Faye, has been selected as the mediator to work with ECOWAS to find ways to bring back Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso back into ECOWAS. Why I am saying this is problematic? It's problematic because we have not fundamentally addressed the challenge of ECOWAS, the regional body. When you look at these three countries that created a new alliance, they explain clearly why they left. As the founding members of ECOWAS, they saw the inadequacy of ECOWAS to address sovereign decisions of countries, and two, to stop the proliferation of armed groups in the region, and three, that ECOWAS has become the mouthpiece of France, and become a mouthpiece of Western nations. Beyond the statements of the Sahel Alliance, let's just look at ECOWAS meetings. You go to an ECOWAS meeting where you have ECOWAS president sitting, you are seeing the United States government represented in the meeting, you're seeing French diplomat represented in the meeting, and you're asking yourself, is this a meeting of African states, or is this an international meeting with international actors? It becomes confusing. So not addressing the fact that ECOWAS has lost integrity with the people is a problem, right? And Diomaye Faye, who through the popular mobilization in Senegal, in Senegal, the people of Senegal were very clear that they do not want the former president Macky Sall to stay in power. There was grassroots mobilization that brought Diomaye Faye to be president, but his posture at the moment is making all of us question what is the future of Senegal when Senegal is playing the mediation between the two new body with the new body and the old ECOWAS and the Sahel States, while the people of Burkina Faso, of Mali, of Niger are very clear that their leaders today are sovereign leaders who are making decisions on behalf of the masses of these countries.
I mean, it's really incredible to witness what's taking place, Kambale. And I'm curious if you could touch on how this could possibly pose a challenge to something like AFRICOM as well as ECOWAS.
Specifically for the Sahel Alliance, they've been very clear around the imperialism in the region, and they've defined what they are. From the currency to foreign military bases there, one of them being U.S. military base in Niger, the largest drone base. They have asked these nations, specifically France and the United States, to leave the country. The French soldiers were the first to leave. The United States is leaving up until September. I think up until the end of the year, I think all the troops from the United States will be out of Niger. But why are people, not just the government, right, of the Sahel states, why are they calling for these soldiers to leave? One, I do not see a Niger drone base in the United States. Why do we have a U.S. drone base in Niger, right? Two, the security situation of the countries has not improved. So if it hasn't improved, what are these drones doing in the region? So we do know what the drones are doing. The drones are not there for the security of the Sahel. The drones are there for U.S. interest, to protect U.S. interest. Because of that, we see that the people are becoming very clear that if we want security in our country, we need to take control of our destiny. And when you look at the resolutions coming out of the first summit, it's a very amazing document, right? You could sense the spirit of the resolution that speaks about how they are going to have food sovereignty, how are they going to have sovereignty around security, and how are they going to share resources among themselves to strengthen the countries. These are the fundamental principles of even the creation of ECOWAS or even the creation of the African Union. And these principles have not been applied or enforced. Now you are having states saying, since all the institutions that are implementing that, we are actually going to do that by ourselves. But it's inspiring to see that they have the courage to tell the United States and France that we do not need your military on our land for our security. We use the resources we have and we'll collaborate with nations who respect our sovereignty in the decisions that we are making to provide security to our people.
You know, Kambale, one of the things that's interesting in terms of looking at is looking also at the response of the imperialists who seem to be trying to shift their approach. And I know the French Economic Warfare School, for instance, recently put out a long document about what the future of France is. There are some things that seem to be happening with Cote d'Ivoire and Benin and other countries. So how are we seeing the response of France and the United States? Because obviously their troops are being kicked out, but it's not as if they're just saying, okay, we're giving up here in terms of their attempts to manipulate the politics of Africa.
And it's fascinating. You quote that document, and it's a document has accessible now vastly online of what the School of Economic Warfare actually published. I mean, can you imagine that France has a school for economic warfare? And when you look at the document, they have clearly determined who's the enemy for France. The enemy of France is not a NATO country. It's not a global power. The enemy of France, according to the School of Economic Warfare, is Pan-Africanism. That's very telling, right? That they actually have over a 200 plus page document discussing how Pan-Africanism is a threat to French interests and to France itself. And they've mentioned names of Africans who are actually working for the betterment of Africa. When you see the names, you are confused. Why are they the enemy of France? And what they list in the document as danger is that these individuals, these institutions, be it media platforms, be it activists, are raising the consciousness of the African people around French imperialism. What does that mean? And they put it in the document that they've been working for decades to raise the consciousness of the African people, particularly in Francophone Africa, around the use of a currency that they don't control, and the fact that the reserves of these countries are found in the Bank of France. How can that be something negative for Africans, right? This is a call for Africans to be sovereign, that we should have our own currency, not a currency controlled by France. So we are clear that France is seeing Pan-Africanism, a particular form of Pan-Africanism as well, right? The left Pan-Africanism, if we have to put it, a Pan-Africanism that's calling for African people to control their land, to control their resources, and to exploit those resources for the benefit, not of the elite, of the entire population. That's the enemy of France. Even if they publish this document, we on the African continent, we know that for Africa to develop, for Africa to be a force in the world of good, we must unite. We might not just unite as the African Union or as ECOWAS. We must unite in a way where we control our land, we control our resources, and we exploit them for the benefit of the masses. And we know one body that's doing that. It's the Alliance des États du Sahel, AES, the Sahel Alliance that has been created. And we see that by their actions. We see them by the actions of how these countries are looking into building infrastructure together. That we're seeing how they are saying we are going to exploit the uranium and the oil to benefit the Confederation. We are seeing in the discussion in Burkina Faso around food sovereignty, how we're going to produce agricultural products that will feed our people before we export it. So we see concretely That's the Pan-Africanism that they are pushing for. That's the Pan-Africanism that the vast majority of the African people support. And that is what France is calling the enemy of France. Unfortunately for them, the African youth is clear about Pan-Africanism. This is why from Nairobi to Bamako, all Africans are saying enough and start to the elite who are building for the West, and all power to the people to control our land, to control our resources, to free our people from the bondage and the misery they exist today.
You know, Kambale, that sounds fantastic. I guess the question becomes, you know, the imperialists, they don't take these things lying down. So what are the potential challenges here? I mean, I'm sure there are many, but I mean, just the first couple that come to mind, you know, I can't imagine the US and France are just going to throw their hands up and say, okay, guys, we give up. We're just going to leave this alone and let you do your thing. That's never happened. So what can we expect to see from I guess the reactive side of the imperialist powers?
We're already seeing it. It's going to be a struggle. Let's look at what happened to Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, the AES alliance. You know, they had inhumane sanctions, right? The borders of these countries were definitely locked, right? This was a decision of ECOWAS through the influence of Westerns. We also see the accusations from Burkina Faso, from Mali and Niger, that some countries, particularly Côte d'Ivoire, right? Côte d'Ivoire has allowed its soil, and Benin, these two countries have allowed their soil to house so-called terrorists, and not only that, allow French soldiers to actually use the soil for military training, and in what they're predicting will be an attack on the Sahel states, right? So, and there will be more and more of these actions. The thing that I think is very insidious, and that's why I brought it up, is the July 7th ECOWAS meeting, where the newly elected president of Senegal, Diomaye Faye, has been chosen as the mediator between AES and ECOWAS. That's very insidious because he ran a campaign, they ran a campaign around imperialism. But now that they are in power, you know, they decided not to have radical shifts as we see in AES. They are sharing statements that's worrisome. Just last week, I think on July 15th, the president of Senegal, Diomaye Faye, held a press conference in the presidential palace discussing with local press about his positions on the region. And one of the journalists asked him directly, what is the position of the president of Senegal vis-a-vis French military in Senegal? Are you saying, one, that they must leave? Or two, if they do not leave, why you are choosing the position? Diomaye Faye didn't respond to the question. He actually did the question. So since July 15th, everyone is questioning what is unfolding in Senegal, whereby the position that they had prior to presidential election is completely different. And of course, there will be more. So when we're speaking about the United States and France, we have to also think about the elite that control the region and how they are going to be used as Africans. It's going to be presented as an African solutions, Africans, brothers and sisters, to bring one another back into ECOWAS. That's not what the people of this Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso are calling for. They're calling for a radical break with imperialism. So we have to keep an eye out on it. There will be many things happening. It's already happening, but I'm still very confident because of the grassroots of progressive forces in the Sahel for decades to educate the masses around why we must be sovereign and control our own destiny, that no matter what happened in the sub-region, the people will hold the leaders accountable. And for those who are still in the ECOWAS, I'm seeing a trend. Guy Marius Sagna, the member of parliament for representing Senegal in ECOWAS, he's in the committee for audit. For the past 2 weeks, he's been challenging ECOWAS inside of the ECOWAS parliament. It's fascinating to watch those videos where he's actually asking very basic questions. Why is it that at ECOWAS, that the delegation from Liberia submit an official report about the security situation in Liberia, and in the first sentence of the security situation in Liberia, the enemy, the stability in Liberia, they're saying that is caused by the influence of communists. That is preposterous. This is the official report of Liberian ECOWAS. The second thing that he has asked is about the influence of foreign institutions into the agenda of building infrastructure in ECOWAS. And the more you follow his action in the ECOWAS parliament, which is now being posted even online, you are noticing people making comments. You should be worried, right? You should be careful. They may kill him. He's saying too much. But we need people who are going to challenge ECOWAS internally. So even inside the ECOWAS, there are many contradictions around how they operate, how they decide for the region, how even the people that they represent do not know the decisions that are being made at the ECOWAS parliament. And thanks to Guy Marius Sagna of Senegal, we are able to know the situation. So from the Sahel, AES, to those who are still within ECOWAS, everyone is showing the contradiction of ECOWAS being the tool of Western imperialism, and the people are rising up against it, and they will be successful. I believe they will definitely be successful.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kambale Musavuli, analyst with the Center for Research on the Congo-Kinshasa, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you always, and see you next time.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rania, we're going to keep moving forward here in the show. We want to turn to another crucially important issue, and that is the broader situation in Northeast Asia and some efforts to address the U.S. policy there in South Korea, in particular, the Republic of Korea. We are very, very happy to be joined here on the show by Jamie Tyberg, who's a Korean organizer with Nodutdol, which is just announcing a new campaign, U.S. out of Korea. So, Jamie, thank you so much for being with us here on the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to join y'all here.
Well, great to have you here. And, you know, you all at Nodutdol are launching this new campaign, U.S. out of Korea. So just for context here, for those who maybe don't know, how extensive really is the U.S. military and related presence, you know, in South Korea, the Republic of Korea? And, you know, how has it been intensifying as of late?
Mm-hmm. So in South Korea alone, the U.S. military has 62 bases and 28,500 troops stationed in South Korea. These are actually just U.S. military bases in South Korea. They actually also have access to the existing South Korean military bases as well as South Korean military personnel. And they would have operational control over them in times of war. The largest U.S. military base actually is located in South Korea, the one outside of North Korea. It's in the city of Pyeongtaek. And just to offer a visual of the U.S. military presence in South Korea, these are like huge walled off sections of the city. There's repeated signs of no trespassing. Entire roads that used to be available to Korean people are blocked off now. And these military bases are also next to community centers. They're next to churches. They're next to playgrounds and schools where children are. And so they're really somatically disrupting the sense of safety that Korean people feel in their cities. The U.S. military is also just more than the number of troops or the number of military bases. The U.S. is deploying regularly U.S. warplanes, nuclear submarines, heavy bombers, aircraft carriers, and they're hosting hundreds of military exercises annually on the peninsula. And these exercises even include the rehearsal of the invasion of North Korea. And in terms of intensification, we've really been seeing a major escalation by the U.S. in Korea. Last year alone, the number of war games or the military exercises exceeded 200 days. And this is pushing the relations and the tensions in Korea and the relation between the two Koreas into a breaking point. Because of all of the increased hostility, North Korea is now completely disinterested in dialogue with the U.S. It's even closed the door on a peaceful reunification with South Korea, which it has pursued for decades because the South Korean government is becoming so hostile. And so now North Korea is being forced to respond with increasing their defenses. And this is putting the Korean Peninsula at the highest risk of an active state of war in decades.
That's just wild to have it framed that way because, you know, in the media and, of course, the way the U.S. government frames it, it's always that the U.S. presence in Korea is there to protect the Republic of Korea. They're just there to, like, make everybody safe, right? And, of course, deterring threats. So, you know, what's the real purpose of having such a huge footprint on the peninsula if not to protect the Republic of Korea?
Mm-hmm. Before I get into the real purpose, I would say in terms of the narrative around the U.S. is there to really protect people, you know, when I talk to my family members in South Korea or talking with the organizers in South Korea or all of the elders, one thing that is clear across class, across age, across gender is that U.S. presence does not translate to safety or security or peace. For my grandparents' generation who lived through the Korean War, they witnessed firsthand the violence of the U.S. military. They saw the number of bombs that were dropped on Korea during the Korean War, which exceeded the number of bombs that they dropped in the entire Pacific during the Second World War. And just a few weeks ago, actually, the South Korean media reported that a new CIA document has been uncovered that proves that the U.S. gave orders to bomb civilian neighborhoods in Seoul in the early days of the Korean War. And so while we are taught, if we're taught at all, that Seoul was destroyed by North Korea, now we have evidence, a CIA document as evidence that the U.S. was the culprit that played the larger role in the destruction of Korea. But to speak to the real purpose of why is the U.S. in Korea, I would say it's really a direct response to the sharp decline in the U.S.'s drive toward unipolar world power. They're losing power politically, they're losing power financially, they're losing power economically. The only power that they have left to exert is military power. They're seeing the emerging multipolarity under the guidance of the People's Republic of China, of Russia, the former Soviet Union. And unlike other countries that might also have some power, these two countries are huge, both in terms of population as well as land mass. So the US knows that it can't actually compete with them when it comes down to it. And China especially is surpassing the US economically. And China is also playing more of a mediating and facilitating role on the world stage politically. We saw this with Palestine when China invited the political parties of Palestine to discuss dialogue and unity. And countries in the Pacific, in Asia, particularly consider China as a source of collective economic development. So to them, the US poses a lose-lose situation, whereas integrating their economy and their country's trade, et cetera, with China offers them a win-win situation. And this is extremely, extremely dangerous for the US in protecting their interests in the region, as well as their position of hegemony. And Korea happens to be situated in a strategic location where having access to the peninsula, or at least the southern part of the peninsula, allows the U.S. to directly contest with the emerging multipolar powers. And I would also say that the U.S. is aware that their military is stretched way too thin across the globe. I mean, it's the only country that has military command structures all over the world, all over all the different regions, all the different continents. And so it knows that without the defense alliances that it has in South Korea, Thailand, Philippines, Japan, and Australia, it would not be able to actually maintain its interest in that region.
No, I think that's critically important analysis, and you know, and to some degree, in both what you were saying there and what your response to the first question, you've already spoken to this to some degree, but I want to speak to it a little bit more because I think it's critically important, and I know it's both historical and contemporary, but the impact on just the day-to-day lives of people in South Korea, of course, where all these U.S. troops are, but I would assume, you know, also in North Korea as well, where if you're faced with this, undoubtedly that's affecting your day-to-day life. If you could just speak a little bit more about those kind of impacts of what this U.S. military presence is really having on people.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty mainstream and honestly has crossed over to the culture, I would say, that the U.S. military is not a force of security and safety for people. I mean, take a look at the movie The Host, which was a huge blockbuster in South Korea as well as across the world, directed by the director of Parasite. The movie is literally about the pollution from the US military giving birth to a monster in the Han River, which then destroys the lives of regular working people in Korea. The US military has admitted to burying massive barrels of Agent Orange in South Korean soil, which, if you know anything about the environment, it's the same soil that also crosses over to the north. Groundwater in Seoul itself has been poisoned by the US military. Tons of other places where US war games and military dumping are happening have left massive amounts of carcinogens in the soil and the water. And the thing about these being US military bases is that when something happens, say like an oil spill, Korean authorities are not actually allowed access to go and investigate and try to clean up. They have to just completely resign their powers to the US military, which is not going to clean up, which is not going to take accountability for all of the damages that it is doing to the Korean environment. And just military violence is a huge topic of discussion among Korean people. Back in 2002, 2 middle school girls were killed when a US forces convoy driving an armored vehicle struck and crushed them. This is left in the cultural memory of the people. And, we don't have to discuss this, but we all know the US military is one of the biggest institutional polluters on Earth. So whatever it's doing across the world is contributing to the accelerating climate crisis that generations of people are going to have to now suffer and deal with.
And on that note, I'm curious if you could tell us about your new campaign and what you are hoping to achieve.
Yes, absolutely. As an organization made up of Korean diaspora as well as other Asian diaspora, we understand that right now the problem is that the US is able to do whatever it wants to do in Korea without facing any domestic criticism or opposition. So the American public has been kept in the dark and completely misled about the reality of Korea. And so we're launching this campaign because first and foremost, we're really concerned about the war and this next frontier of the Third World War or the new Cold War. We don't want any more bombs dropped on Korea. There's a genocide already happening in Palestine. There's a genocide in the Congo. We don't want another genocide in Korea. It's also not in the interest of the majority of the American people either. It only serves the American ruling class and only fills the pockets of those in the military-industrial complex. And so we want to end this era of US impunity in Korea, and by doing that and through the struggle of Korean independence, we want to support and expand this broad anti-imperialist front that's really re-emerging inside the empire. And I think the first thing that we really want to achieve is just educate the masses of people on this issue, because there is so much that is forgotten or unknown about Korea and the Korean War and why the US is continuing its occupation of the Korean Peninsula. And we just want to be organized and ready to oppose the US whenever it really starts to escalate in Korea. And I want to emphasize that, again, this is not just a campaign for Koreans. It concerns everybody in the US. The situation in Korea could easily lead to nuclear war. US is actually they are actually who introduced nuclear weapons to the peninsula when they snuck in thousands of nuclear weapons to South Korea. And so it really affects everyone, and we want to call on every person in the US to oppose US imperialism in Korea, because opposing US imperialism anywhere supports the resistance to it everywhere. We're going to be launching the campaign next Saturday officially. If you are in New York or the Bay or LA, we have local events happening that you can find out through our social media. Or if you're anywhere else, our launch will be on the People's Forum YouTube page, so you can tune in that way.
Excellent. Right on. Well, we really appreciate it. And you are an organizer with Nodutdol, so hopefully people check out your social media if they want to learn more. Jamie Tyberg, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Well, Eugene,
Yes.
that was a fantastic breakdown of
Yes.
just how detrimental the U.S. military presence is to this
Crucial.
entire area of the world.
Yeah, people have no idea. I mean, people have no idea in America. I thought Jamie made that point. If we're ever taught about anything, and we're never taught about anything in the Korean War, Americans, you have to get hip to this and really understand it. I mean, it's been just decades and decades of destructive activity. I'll just say this before we move on quickly. Just one fact. Curtis LeMay, who is the head of the strategic bombing in the Korean War of America, estimated, and this is now considered to be, by the way, a conservative estimate, he estimated that they killed 20% of the people in North Korea. 20% of the people. Now, to make that even deeper, if you broke that down as like a percentage of the population, that would be a larger percentage of the population than the number of people who died in any country in World War II. So you think about the Soviet Union, which lost 27 million people. That's actually a smaller percentage of the Soviet population than the number of people killed relative to population in what has become the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So, amazing in the worst possible way, amazing, history there that has to be understood to also get our contemporary piece in line here. So thanks again to Nodutdol for joining us here on the show. We're going to move forward here to the ongoing genocide in Palestine and everything surrounding that, including the upcoming trip of Prime Minister Netanyahu to Washington, D.C. next week. We are, as always, very honored to be joined here on the Freedom Side by Leanne Fulahan, who is the Education Director at the People's Forum and an editor at 1804 Books. Pretty good press, if you ask me. Leanne, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to be here.
Well, great to have you here as always, because it's, hard to sort through some of this news and information. I mean, on the one hand, you have the New York Times and others saying Netanyahu's under fantastic pressure to, make a ceasefire before he comes to speak before Congress. On the same token, he was in Rafah today making this whole big thing about the need for Israel to control the border crossing and more things happening in that regard. So, I guess, in the wake just a few days before Netanyahu travels to Washington, D.C. to speak before Congress, where do we stand, Leanne? Is it possible there could be a ceasefire, or should we believe Netanyahu when he tells us who he says he is?
Well, it's very difficult to make predictions in this kind of scenario. The White House is saying that they're optimistic. They've been saying that they're optimistic for actually, I don't even know how long now, consistently saying that they're optimistic. When Netanyahu is signaling that he's moving actually to draw out the negotiations, and is even making moves that could lead to the end of the negotiations. For example, we had a ceasefire proposal where Hamas showed an immense amount of flexibility, even took away their most bare minimum of asking for a written guarantee of a permanent ceasefire, and said they would be okay with beginning a temporary truce as long as there would be a written guarantee that they would be able to move into the second phase of negotiations without time limits. This is a major sign of flexibility. In response, Netanyahu released 4 demands, which are just completely against any nature of an agreement. His demands range from not wanting to leave the Philadelphia corridor, so not wanting to remove the Israeli occupation forces from the border with Egypt and Israel, from wanting a guarantee that Israel would be allowed to go back in and militarily resume operations. So basically, he wants a guarantee that the agreement would only be temporary. He wants a guarantee that there would not be the return of any resistance fighters back to the north, and that they would get their hostages. He's basically asking for a temporary truce to retrieve some of those who are being held as prisoners here in Gaza, and then to be able to return to the massacres that he has been carrying out under his government. So it's really, even his own government is very divided on this. Of course, the more right-wing side of the Israeli government is saying that he should not sign the ceasefire deal, that he should not fold under pressure to reach a ceasefire deal. The opposition is, of course, calling it actually very accurately. They're saying that he is creating obstacles every 10 minutes and that he needs to just get over it and sign it, that he is the main obstacle here. It's clear that Netanyahu and the Israelis have been the main obstacle from the beginning. And this, combined with the fact that the United States has not significantly escalated any pressure on the Israelis to reach an agreement, to me means that it's unlikely, unless Netanyahu changes some of his stance, that there would be a deal anytime soon. But of course, it's hard to predict because a lot of this relies on his statements, his actions. Like you said, he was in Rafah today. He was in Rafah saying that it's critical that the Israeli occupation remains there. So it's really a tense situation that's marked by Israel's intransigence and unwillingness to actually negotiate. And in fact, I'm sure we'll get to this, but throughout the past weeks of negotiation process, not only have they not shown any flexibility, any real flexibility at the negotiating table, but they have increased and intensified their genocidal actions against the Palestinian people. There is no such thing as a safe zone anymore. There is no such thing as any place for Palestinians to shelter. 8 out of 10 UNRWA schools have been bombed in the past 10 days. 8 UNRWA schools have been bombed in the past 10 days, so it's a really very dire situation. The genocide is only continuing.
So, and it is continuing, and it's continuing with horrible, just atrocity after atrocity. I mean, sometimes I'm just completely stunned. I think I've seen the worst, and then something worse happens. That said, Israel does face many challenges. Some of them are a bit more long-term. Israel's running out of tanks. Israel's running out of ammunition. Its soldiers are getting tired. The Israelis are desperate to conquer Gaza. They also want to conquer Lebanon, and they can't do it all at the same time. And yes, they have no red lines from the Americans in many ways, but Israel is not all powerful, right? And one of the challenges is also something that Netanyahu mentioned quite early on, which is protests in Western countries. And so I raise that to ask about the activities that will be ongoing next week. There seem to be many planned activities, protests against Netanyahu's presence, which I have to say, the level of entitlement, it's quite bold. I mean, he's going to come basically demand more support from our elected representatives when a vast majority of Americans support a ceasefire. So, Leanne, what can we expect to see in response to Netanyahu's presence in D.C. next week?
Well, we're already seeing quite a bit of outrage because it is extremely bold. It's outrageous that Netanyahu, who is not only a war criminal in every sense of the word, I mean, we're expecting that the ICC is going to release the arrest warrants soon. And even Netanyahu is quite nervous about this. He's lowering the delegation, the size of the delegation that usually travels with him, so that he can take a plane that won't have to make any stops for refueling. There'll be less weight, less people, so that he doesn't have to risk stopping in a country that might be party to the Rome Convention and that would be obligated to arrest him in the case that there would be arrest warrants issued. He's making preparations for this. He's showing up to the United States, which is not a part of that does not ratify the convention of the ICC, that does not seem obligated by it at all, and he's going to speak to the Congress, to a united Congress, right before extremely controversial presidential elections. It is absolutely outrageous, and I think what you can see is that the U.S. public, which has gone through a lot over the past 9 months, the political crisis that the White House's inability to respond to the basic demands of the American population around the U.S. Foreign policy regarding Israel and Palestine has created such a high political and intense political crisis, and people are furious. And here would be the executioner, the actual the person who carries out the genocide, using, of course, all of the U.S. resources and support. But this very, vilified persona in Benjamin Netanyahu, hated not only by those who stand with the Palestinian people, which the number of those who stand with the Palestinian people is growing by the hour in the United States public as the genocide continues to unfold in its 9th month, but also hated by people who feel something for the Israeli project. Even Israelis are now rejecting the idea of who would come and visit the United States Congress. 500, it came out in the New York Times this morning that 500 Israeli academics, intellectuals wrote letters to Congress asking for the invitation to be revoked. It's really a very controversial visit. He's planning on having a meeting with Biden on Monday, the 22nd, and then he will be speaking in front of Congress on the 24th. We can expect that there will be some rejection of his visit, some visible rejection from some Democratic representatives, of course, but the real rejection is going to come from the American people, from the general public. Many organizations are coming together to organize another national mobilization in Washington, D.C., at the Capitol, to show the mass rejection of Netanyahu's visit, and the mass rejection really at its essence for this blank check that the United States has given to the Israeli genocidal assault on the Palestinian people. Of course, many people will have varying opinions about how that relationship should look like. Many people feel that relationship should not exist, but everyone agrees that Netanyahu himself is completely not welcome, and is certainly not welcome to be speaking to such a high body of the U.S. System. So there's going to be, I think, a massive crowd in Washington, D.C. There's going to be people coming from all over the country. We know people are getting on planes, people are getting on buses. It's going to be historic. We are going to be wearing red, and we are going to say that we are the red line against genocide yet again, and we continue to be the red line, that the White House is not acting in our name. And it's likely to be the largest rejection of any foreign diplomatic visit in U.S. history. It should be very, very historic, and I hope that everybody finds a way to be there.
Yes, well, I think it very well could be. I mean, it honestly feels surreal that they're even trying to push forward and do this. For those who are looking to find out more information and perhaps educate themselves on some of the things that may or may not be happening, there Leanne next Wednesday, and how they can, if they so choose, get involved. Where should they go?
Well, they can go to the Shut It Down for Palestine a website. That's Shut It Down for the number palestine.org, or the Answer Coalition website, where you can also see all the bus information, and sign up for a bus, register your transportation there if you want to offer it out to more people. We're all going to help each other get there. It's really important to be there. We need to show Netanyahu actually what it's like to be in one of those massive protests in a Western country that he himself identified many months ago as one of the biggest threats to the success of the Israeli project. We're going to actually show him what it means to be there with a massive protest, rejecting every bit of his agenda.
Well, and let me just ask you this quickly as a follow-up here before we close, which I think is important. And you're speaking to this issue, I think, very well, and you spoke to it throughout. I mean, the role of these protests in disrupting the political scene. I mean, what is the role of these protests that are happening in Western capitals in addressing the issue of the genocide? I mean, we're 9 months in. I think there are many people who may feel, somewhat helpless in some sense because it's so horrifying to watch. So anyway, if you could just speak to that to some degree about this sort of the practical role it really plays for there to be mass protests like this.
Well, it's really a major factor of restraint for how Israel is able to seek out international support for what it is doing right now. The protests across the world, and not just in Western countries, across the world, that have been massive and that have been growing and that have been consistent for now almost a year, which is quite significant, have succeeded in many ways in turning around the Zionist narrative that had until now dominated most corporate and capitalist media. And it is very difficult, as it is clear now, it is very difficult for the United States to give a blank check to the Israelis when the majority of the population is rejecting it. Of course, we know the ruling classes of Western capitalist countries have the means to do whatever they want. And that's why the genocide is continuing right now. And that's why it's the resistance on the ground that is really providing the real confrontation with the actual question of how the genocide will end. But in terms of the ability for countries to continue supporting Israel, and even for Israel to continue getting what it needs to continue carrying out this military operation. We know they're getting tired. We know that they are consistently asking for more and more tools and more weapons and more help because they are not winning. These massive protests make it very difficult for lawmakers and policymakers to continue signing off on the genocide without facing consequences at home. We've created a situation where it is no longer normal to just say you support Israel against the terrorism that surrounds them. It is much more normal now to say you don't support genocide. And it's getting more and more normal to say that you support the Palestinian cause. That is unprecedented, in particular in U.S. public opinion, and is going to have long-lasting impacts on the ability for the United States to continue maintaining a foreign policy agenda, not just in regards to its relationship with Israel, but also the entire region, its relationship with Iran, its relationship with Lebanon. It's going to make it very difficult for U.S. imperialism to continue operating with impunity when the majority of the population is not only awake to what the United States' role is, but also is rejecting it. So it's creating a new normal, a new status quo. And we can see the consequences already on the Democratic Party for the fact that they have, under a Democratic administration, they have been unable to respond to the bare minimum demands of the U.S. public on this issue and on many others. So it's going to continue creating this kind of political crisis.
Mm-hmm. Leanne Foulahan, Education Director of the People's Forum and an editor at 1804 Books. As always, thank you so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much for having me.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Well, I'm really happy that the activism continues. I mean, I think the Israelis were really hoping that at this point, people would just kind of become desensitized, get tired, kind of like accept this as the new normal. And what we've seen with repeated waves of different kinds of protests is people are saying no. And, you know, right now it's Netanyahu visiting. Next, the semester is going to start again. And you're going to see, I think, campus protests come back up because a lot of those issues, most of those issues remained unresolved. So it's really inspiring to see people in the belly of the beast continue to show up for Palestine and to demonstrate their disgust with the fact that their tax dollars are going to, this insane story about, I'm sure you saw it making the rounds about this young man, 24-year-old Palestinian man with Down syndrome and autism, who was mauled to death by an Israeli attack dog as he was surrounded by Israeli soldiers who watched him killed, watched him be murdered and torn apart, and then left his body there. Just sick. Every day, something new and sick. And anyways, I'm just glad people are still outraged.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we are going to move here now to the story that is really roiling U.S. politics. Of course, that's the attempted assassination of Donald Trump that took place. And of course, everything that's happening after that with the Republican National Convention coming right after, and some of the fallout implications, all of this we want to discuss. And we are very honored to be joined here on the show by Dr. Ben Becker, who's the editor-in-chief of Breakthrough News. Great outlet. Thank you for being here. Sorry, I should have said that.
No problem. Very happy to be here again.
Well, Ben, of course, we were chatting on Saturday, I believe it was, when this took place. I mean, it really was very, but I don't know, maybe for some people it wasn't unexpected. I did not expect to see that news, and it seems that it really has, in many ways kind of shifted the tenor and the tone of the campaign to some degree, certainly shifted some elements of, I think, how the RNC is being messaged. So, I guess maybe my first question for you here is, what are some of your maybe big picture takeaways about what this means, this attempted assassination on Trump, what it has actually meant in terms of the direction of the political race here for president?
Obviously, the first thing is it's been extremely favorable for Trump, how the political fallout that is. I think not only did the Democrats, they took their ads right off of TV immediately. They canceled their campaign events. They were already trailing significantly Biden. And I think it really cemented Trump's role as the front runner. He has the iconic photograph now, raising his fist with blood dripping down his face, saying fight. this image of him as an unstoppable figure, who's someone who's been targeted but succeeding. He was already saying things like that. So this seems to confirm that, and you can kind of put it in stark contrast with the feebleness of Joe Biden. So in terms of how it's politically playing, also thought it was interesting that Elon Musk and others immediately rushed to endorse him. They had been playing footsie with Trump for months, but to come out, within hours of this attempted assassination and say, now we have to endorse Trump, you really see the billionaire class has swarmed Trump. I think the most recent figure I saw this morning was 60 different billionaires are now officially backing the campaign. Elon Musk announces he's going to put $45 million a month into the campaign, when previously he was saying he's not going to put any money into the presidential campaign. So this, you have all these things happening at once. And in a way, the Democrats are now holding their criticisms or muting their criticisms. Whereas a week ago when we spoke, it was all about how he's an existential threat to democracy. Now that quote unquote rhetoric has been proclaimed as somehow divisive, and they want to be seen as the institutional party, the responsible party, somehow Donald Trump has become a unifying figure. I mean, it's actually quite absurd, and it raises the question about whether did they ever really believe their rhetoric? Because if he's an existential threat, then why do we have to sort of rally in the name of national unity, including Donald Trump? Biden says, we just have disagreements with Donald Trump. Well, I thought he was an existential threat. So the Democratic messaging has become quite confused. The Republicans are still going on the offensive, although I think in a somewhat different way in the RNC than they would have otherwise. And J.D. Vance's speech was one part of that, but we'll see what Trump says tonight.
Well, Ben, since you mentioned J.D. Vance, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on him as a vice presidential pick? And I know that sounds like a really boring question, but this is not a boring guy, and that's not in a positive sense. This is somebody whose entire career has been funded by the tech billionaire, the anti-China extremist tech billionaire, Peter Thiel, who has, his foreign policy sucks, his domestic policy sucks for a lot of reasons. He's also quite young, and I think that can do well for somebody like Trump, who's quite old. But I'm just curious on your thoughts and what that means about the direction that a potential Trump administration might take with someone like this in the vice presidential position.
I mean, vice presidents don't typically shape the politics that much in U.S. politics. I mean, Dick Cheney was a exception to that. But in any case, I think the appointment of J.D. Vance is very significant for anybody who cares about, the future of the working class, the future of the country, the future of global politics. J.D. Vance, in a way, has been now named the heir apparent to Trump. And Trump is constitutionally limited to 2 terms. So the idea of Vice President Vance, which I think is more and more likely given the direction of the race, they're positioning him for President Vance, if you can believe that. I think that when I watched the speech last night, I thought J.D. Vance is a very talented demagogue. And I understand why they picked him, because he speaks to a certain audience and in a certain manner that allows the Republican Party to present itself falsely as a party of the working class, a party that's against war, a party that really can relate to people who are struggling. It started with his book, Hillbilly Elegy. It's all quite fraudulent. I mean, there are elements of his story, his personal story, that are true. But the idea that this guy who's actually, his whole career, as you said, has been propped up by like a supervillain tech billionaire, that his previous jobs were in venture capital, whose whole idea is that they can basically get into new markets and destroy jobs, extract the value. This is in the equity firms that he worked with, destroy the value of the existing jobs, or develop new businesses that basically put whole industries out of work. So, it's actually amazing that same person could stand up in front of the RNC and talk about bringing jobs back and doing this and doing that and relating to the common man and all that. I mean, in a way, the Republican Party is trying to take the place of the Democratic Party, which for decades was the party that presented itself as the pro-working class party and in some ways the anti-war party. I mean, it's almost laughable when you think about how in bed the Democratic Party was with Wall Street and with the war makers, but that was their presentation. And as the Democratic Party, I would say, abandoned any policies that could have potentially, helped the working class, that's created a vacuum that the Republicans are now gladly stepping into. So you have J.D. Vance talking about the working class and the ruling class. He actually said the ruling class twice last night. These were class terms that were basically forbidden in all American politics for years. The Democrats would only even say the middle class. But the fact that there actually is no working class party allows the two ruling class parties to pretend to be the working class party. And so I think his speech was a way of presenting in that way, even though the Republican Party has actually no program and can possibly develop a program that would help the working class because they're working hand in hand with Wall Street the whole way. At the same time, people are hurting in this country. And there's been 30 million mass layoffs since 1996. That's like a fifth of the work. 30 million. I mean, when you think about that, a mass layoff is when you get laid off with 49 of your coworkers or more. That's happened to 30 million people in this country. So who has an answer to that? So in truth, neither the Democrats nor Republicans have an answer to that. It would be easy to fix. So lacking an answer, they can just sort of pretend. And they can say, well, we know people are hurting and you're dealing with addiction and you're dealing with suicide and you're dealing with homelessness and unemployment. And the last guy in power is the one who betrayed you. But the next guy in power, he's going to be the one to help you. So in a way, the Republicans have learned from the demagogy of the Democrats, is what I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I think it speaks to people's total disgust with the political system. I mean, the Data for Progress recently did a poll on, so-called swing voters, 60% of whom, by the way, said they wanted the government to actually have more social programs and do more for working class people. 52% of whom, by the way, are not culturally conservative, maybe is the best way to put it, or at least are willing to, coexist with others who they know are not culturally conservative. But what was notable is, when they broadened out the poll to not just Trump and Biden, but to include many third-party candidates, Trump and Biden went to like single digits in support among swing voters. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I don't think is much of an alternative, but nonetheless is outside the two major parties, sort of surged to the top of the plurality of, I think, 40-some% of those voters. The others that were polled, Jill Stein and Cornel West, also doing very significant. And I'm just raising that to say that, does it feel that the sort of fraudulence of this is clear enough on both sides? I mean, obviously the Democrats and Republicans have their supporters, they have their partisans, they have the people who they've scared into voting for them no matter what. But it does seem when you look at, the debate, the first debate was one of the lowest rated debates that has existed. The RNC from the first night to the second night, the drop off was massive. You have the sort of rise of independents and third parties and others becoming more significant in a way. You're even seeing in the Senate, the growth of independents as candidates and so on and so forth. So anyway, I'm just saying, does it seem that there is a shift potentially happening here, whether or not it's going to happen, in the next year or 2 years, where the sort of existing two-party system could start to fracture to some degree, as we've seen in the past when there have been great sort of challenges and inflection points for the United States?
I mean, there's 63% of people who say they would support a third party, who are basically tired of the two-party system, want a third or maybe a fourth party. And of course, we know many systems across the globe have third and fourth parties. And there are moments in U.S. history prior to the Civil War in particular, but some afterwards where third parties started to take off. I think people are definitely open to it. And I think people want it. What people want exactly, though, has yet to really crystallize. I mean, I think the sort of a progressive third party, a labor party that speaks to all the issues you're talking about would be very popular. But there's a conundrum, which is that if the ruling class stays totally united, which they basically are, I mean, the parties themselves haven't come apart. So there are efforts to try to build parties from below. And there have been over the decades. But it's at those moments that you see the two corporate parties basically unite to keep third parties off the ballot. So in Georgia, for instance, last week, the Democratic Party filed notice to put the PSL off the ballot, to take the Green Party off, RFK, Cornel West. And then in the other states where other right-wing parties get on, the Republicans will try to remove them. So, and then both parties will work together to keep third parties out of the debates. So, there's basic structural problems where nobody wants to vote third party, or fewer people want to because they feel like they're wasting their vote, that is not viable. But of course, if everyone thinks that way, then it becomes true. But then in cumulative, when you see 63% of the people actually want a third party, you see that there could be a breakthrough. So I think that, there's all the contradictions in both parties that could allow that to happen, but it remains to be seen. It kind of requires a level of bravery on certain ruling class figures, bravery on the part of organized labor, for instance, to want to break away from the Democrats. I haven't seen a lot of that kind of bravery. I think we talked last week about how the Squad and the progressives, who you would think would have an axe to grind against Biden, have in fact been the ones who have been defending him to the very last moment. I mean, you even have Pelosi, Schumer, Obama coming out saying basically that Biden should step aside, or that maybe it's time, that he's dragging down the House and the Senate. And yet you have the progressives who are still sticking by him. Even though Biden's whole position, the fact that he's even the candidate was an anti-progressive corporate candidate, a way to block the progressives. So if there are ever a moment to break free of this two-party system, this would be it. And I think a lot of people are thinking in that way, and they're just trying to now figure out who their options are.
And Ben, I mean, I know it's like not always the best to make predictions, but it does seem like we're moving in the direction of Biden eventually having to step down. The chorus of Democrats in leadership positions calling for that to happen. It's growing. I mean, there was the donor class that started, and of course, the Democrats follow the donor class because it's basically a corporation. And now you've got leaders like Adam Schiff and like Chuck Schumer suggesting that this may need to happen, and others as well. So I'm just curious, do you think it's inevitable that we're going to see a different candidate from the Democrats?
If you had asked me yesterday, I would have said no. Today, I would say it's likely based on how things have shaken out. Who knows what tomorrow brings? Either way, I don't think it's anything to get excited about, to be honest. I mean, it's nothing.
What?
I mean, this
could change the party, Ben. I'm sorry. I can't even say that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it'll put, they'll probably put Kamala Harris there, who obviously it's a facelift compared to Biden. She's able to speak much better than Biden, and she's able to get around and seems healthier and, has greater endurance and attention span and so forth. But she represents the exact same policies. And in a way, there's something very fitting about Biden and Trump being the two representatives, the two faces of the capitalist political system right now. That's quite clarifying. So there's part of me that says Biden should, him staying in is in a way the most accurate face of what the system has become. So yeah, I mean, I think it's likely that he'll come out, but it still won't mean that the working class or oppressed people or all the people that are hurting in this country now have a great option in front of them. Again, I think that there were attempts to have a progressive rebellion inside the Democratic Party. Those were all extinguished and squelched. Joe Biden was running in third and fourth place in the 2020 primaries. He never polled above 20%. He never got over 20% in those initial primaries. So for him to be again in the teens in terms of approval ratings, or I think it was 18% of the country believes he's now mentally fit and fit to run for office. Only 36% of Democratic voters who voted for him in 2020 want him to stay in the race. 36%. That means almost 2 in 3 want him to drop out. So at this point, it's just an incredible display of egomania and arrogance for him to even stay in whatsoever. But again, it wasn't someone who ever really earned his spot. He was put there to be the face of Wall Street. And whoever gets in there, let's Kamala Harris, let's say, or Gavin Newsom, who I heard referred to at a county fair recently as Gavin Hairspray, if people want to just use that one. But Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris, either one, they'll just have their own group of billionaire donors. So we'll have a Republican with 60 billionaire donors. Maybe the Democrats will have their 60 billionaire donors. And if they're contributing, $45 million a month to take the example of Elon Musk, imagine what they're getting out. If they're putting in $150 million on the front end, imagine what they're getting out on the back end. And imagine what they're going to get in terms of their return on their investment. These are capitalists. So why are they investing so much in these parties? Because they want to get a return. So regardless of who replaces Joe Biden, it's going to be someone of that ilk.
No, very good point, and always worth reminding people that the Trump tax cut gave the richest billionaires and 100 millionaires $1 trillion in wealth. So you can see they're getting a lot out of that. But as always, really appreciate you being able to help us sort through all of this. Dr. Ben Becker, Editor-in-Chief of Breakthrough News, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for having me.
Rania?
Well, I think it's really interesting, the clown show we're witnessing in U.S. election politics at the moment. It just gets more and more ridiculous. It's kind of like that assassination attempt seems like it was 2 months ago, because things are just every day, like something insane happens every couple of days. I don't know. It's kind of like too much, guys.
It's a lot happening. There's no doubt. It's a lot happening. One thing I want to just mention, Rania, before we close here is the, ongoing and increasing repression happening in Kenya. People saw earlier this week yet another huge wave of protest. The government has now announced that all protests in Nairobi and near environs are banned, quote unquote, until further notice, which is by most legal experts unconstitutional in Kenya, where the right to protest is enshrined in the Constitution. Booker Biro, who many of you know here from being on our show here on the Freedom Side, who's with the Communist Party of Kenya. They tried to surprise him and surround him and arrest him. He was able to elude that. They then impounded his car, and they're now demanding he come in person to get it back, which is, who knows what they'll do to him when he comes there, and certainly is obviously a tactic designed to intimidate him and others of the Communist Party of Kenya. Tear gas was out. People were shot at this protest on Tuesday. A journalist actually with K24 was shot, and I believe that was some of that was even captured on video. At least 50 people have been killed by the Kenyan police. Hundreds, over 400 it seems at this point, have been injured, because those numbers I think come actually from before this protest actually took place. And we saw there, and you can see, and if you looked and saw in the different things there was quite a bit of repression taking place. There's also these thugs, these goons, as they're being called in Kenya, who are seemingly being deployed by the government. They're wearing plain clothes, but then they're going out and they're doing one of two things. I mean, they're participating sometimes in the repression. I saw an amazing, and I mean that in a bad way, video of one of them, bringing out a riot gun and taking a shot, at very close range at protesters. Then they're also trying to conduct violence, looting shops and things like that to create the image that these are wild, out of control, violent protests of people who are just, robbing and robbing stores and different things like that, trying to create controversy between Kenyans of Somali descent and Somali immigrants and other Kenyans as well over some of that in terms of what they've been doing in the shops and to scare people and keep them off the streets. So it's a massive repressive effort that is actually going on. Activists being constantly arrested, but nonetheless, those who have been on the streets are pledging to continue to protest. Well over 20 counties. There's 23 counties protests took place in. So it's, all across the entire country. And, of course, the original protests were to be against the IMF-sponsored finance bill, but they've now metastasized to really eliminating the entire political class, because those who are going out on the streets are recognizing that it's not just one bill and it's not just one president, it's all of the politicians. Kenya, the legislators there are the second highest paid legislators in the world. The first is actually Nigeria. And if you know anything about Kenya, and this is something that's been heavy in the social networks there, these people love to actually flaunt how rich they are. I saw someone sharing a video of like multiple different legislators talking about how they had helicopters and showing them getting in their helicopters to move around. And this is at a time where 80% of Kenyans who work, 80% of Kenyans who have a job are not making enough to make ends meet at that job. You've got youth unemployment of between 18 and 34, according to some numbers, at 67%. You have double-digit poverty. You have massive inflation and a cost of living crisis like we're seeing around the world. And I think people recognize that the IMF-sponsored bill is connected to the corruption. It's a corporate, imperialist, corrupt political class nexus that is existing of Kenyan elites and international elites who are, making a lot of money out of the country because it's been growing. You see 6.3% growth last year, but they're not giving any of that money to the average Kenyan person. And in fact, they're making that money on the backs of those people. The fact that 80% of people who work don't make enough to make ends meet shows that the wealth is being extracted from them and sent to others. So I think this is something to continue to watch. Amazingly, President Ruto has tried to blame this on the United States and is claiming this is a color revolution being financed by the Ford Foundation, which is unbelievable since like a month ago, he was in Washington, D.C. He was, Biden took the picture with him sitting at the Resolute desk. They had a huge state dinner for him. They made Kenya a major non-NATO ally. They're opening up the spigots for them to have a lot of money to buy weapons and guns and other things like that. They're going to be hosting the largest U.S. military exercise. They're widely considered one of the countries closest to the United States, President Ruto, and now he's trying to claim that they're trying to overthrow him. I mean, it's so absurd, but it's not surprising.
Yeah.
He's taking a page out of Mr. Modi's playbook there in India, where anyone who criticizes him, it must be a U.S.-backed color revolution, and then creating these fake things where, some groups that perhaps do get, grant funding or different things like that from various countries are then considered foreign agents or whatever. So it's very pernicious on multiple levels, and it's totally fake. This is a real mass grassroots movement that is not being directed by the Ford Foundation or anyone else who's outside of Kenya. It's being directed by Kenya's Generation Z, as we can see. So I just wanted to note that and, have people keep their eyes on what's happening there, because they are trying to do whatever they can to close down the democratic space and to prevent people from coming out and trying to change their country for the better.
Well, no, I appreciate that, Eugene, especially because it's not a country you'll hear much about in the U.S. press in this context, except to maybe demonize the protesters, because the U.S. press really likes to hone in on mass movements that rise up in countries where they want the country to be destabilized because it's some enemy nation, whereas Kenya is a close ally to the U.S., so you'll see the opposite playbook thrown at it.
Yes, and leading the occupation of Haiti that is totally funded, backed, and arranged by the United States imperialist government. So the same police who've killed over 50 people and injured over 400, many of them injured for life with long-term permanent disabilities, are the same police that are allegedly being sent to help Haiti address its violence problem. So you can see the contrast there. Nonetheless, that will bring us to the end of the show this week. Rania, big thanks to all our guests, of course, and everyone who watched. Anything you would like for folks to know before we get out of here?
Yeah, I went this entire show without finger wagging at our audience to smash that like button if you haven't already.
Like button.
Thank you very much for that.
Gosh.
It helps boost us in the algorithm. And I want to remind everybody that you can help support Breakthrough News, an important independent media outlet that I feel very privileged to be a part of, by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News, where for as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch, and also just become a part of our team, essentially help us keep growing. It's more important than ever. Consider everything you watched us cover tonight and go look at how the mainstream media is covering it, and then come back and become a member.
Yeah, I agree. That would be a great motivator. Well, as always, really appreciate everyone who is donating in any capacity, but certainly our patrons, all of our viewers, all of our guests. Big shout out to the Breakthrough News team behind the scenes that makes it possible. For myself, for Rania, we will see you next time.